No, good idea. All right, so we have covered the first two things in the three goals. What are the three goals of the macroeconomy first off? Grow the economy, or grow what? Right, remember that grow the economy is the same as growing GDP, right? Again, we don't necessarily agree that it's a good way to do it, to measure it, but that's what we use, right? What else do we want to do? Full employment, right? So that's why we talked about how to calculate unemployment, what does it mean to be employed, and what does it mean to be unemployed, etc. And what's our third goal? Stable prices. This is day one of this second half. The three goals of the macroeconomy. Just reminding you, these three. So you don't forget them. You don't have to write them down, but it's always good to write them down a second or third time so that you can repeat that at some later stage, like on the test. Hint. One of the questions will be, what are the three goals of the macroeconomy? Be able to write these three down. Okay. You don't have to if you don't want to, but then you're not going to get the points. All right, so Chapter 13 talks about inflation. And of course, inflation is what we use to measure whether or not our prices are stable. Hence, this Chapter 13, or the next stage. Now, again, remember that these three goals, the reason why I'm trying to point them out to you is that the book really doesn't stress them very well. But the first three chapters basically cover these three things. All right, and that's why we start with those three things, is to say these are the three goals of any macroeconomy. So, inflation, let me make sure I copy this correctly. All right, so inflation is by definition, an increase in the general average price of goods and services. And again, as with all of our things that are going on here, we will say in an economy over a given time period. So all of these sorts of things that we're working with, whether it's GDP or employment or stable prices, they're really going to be defined per economy, per time period, okay? So you can talk about inflation on a monthly basis, you can talk about inflation on a yearly basis, et cetera, et cetera. Just note that time is a factor, which you guys probably all could have told me already anyways. Time is a factor. Okay, so does this mean that when we have inflation, everything is going up in price? Really? Isn't that what it means? Just the average price. So we have had, for the most part, over the last 10 years, a pretty steady inflation. Not huge, but not small, right? So prices have been going up for the last, say, 10 or 15 years, right? In general, for everything, right? Okay, so name me one thing that hasn't gone up in price in the last 10 years. Farm goods? Right now they're up, though. Name one thing. How much did a cell phone cost 10 years ago? When the cell phones first came out, how much did they cost? You can get one of these for $100. This is the new one, too, the new cheap one, mind you. $99, right? What did you pay for it 10 years ago? $500? Yeah. And that would be a dumb flip one, right?
Yeah. No, they weren't even flipped. They were like brick. They were like brick. I was looking at phones and I'm looking at getting like the S4, and that's $600.
The S4s are 600? Really?
The new iPhone 5 is $700.
Holy crap. Okay, how about How much did a 32-inch flat screen monitor cost 10, 15 years ago? $1,500?
Even televisions, like flat screen TVs.
Yeah, flat screen TVs. They used to be thousands of dollars. Now how much do you pay for a flat screen TV? 300? Yeah, I mean, exactly. So there are a few things that we are actually buying where the price has gone down. Again, the idea, though, is that inflation is the general average prices, right? So it's the average of everything. So some things are probably going down, but most things are probably going up, all right? And again, it doesn't necessarily even have to be most things, right? I mean, it could just be that one thing or yeah, enough to bump the average up, right? Then it almost becomes a numbers game at that stage. And in general, inflation is sort of a numbers game. It'll seem a lot like gambling if you try and play with it. All right, so what's the opposite of inflation? Deflation, okay? How would you define deflation then? It's the exact same, but change increase to decrease. All the words are exactly the same. It's just, I will say, a decrease in the general average price of goods and services in an economy over a given time period. Has there ever been deflation in our economy? Have prices ever gone down on average? Yeah. When? Again, one day does not a time period make. True, if you're working it. Exactly. That is the one point in time when we have had actual, true, real deflation. Prices going down. 30s, late 30s after the Great Depression, prices, or during the Great Depression, prices actually fell. And the reason that prices fell was that people had so little amount of expendable income that we were buying nothing. And in order for businesses to sell anything, what did they have to do? They had to keep lowering and lowering and lowering the prices. And it was so bad that they basically made the average go down. All right? Now, we've almost had that here with the Great Recession. We certainly were at 0% inflation. It never quite lasted a full quarter to have deflation. But we did have at least a month where prices, on average, went down during the Great Recession. Again, same sort of a concept. When a whole ton of people get laid off, what happens? Demand starts to drop, right? When income falls, demand falls. When demand falls, what happens to price? Falls with it, right?
All the restaurants started advertising all their value.
Oh, yeah, Oh, come on. That's when the dollar menu started to actually become important, right? I mean, they had it around, or Wendy's had it around earlier, but the rest of them had to follow suit when the recession rolled around. Again, try to keep people paying. All right, so now there's another slightly different term. Disinflation. Disinflation, the definition of disinflation is the drop in the inflation, but it's still inflationary, but not to deflation levels. So when the inflation rate dropped from 5% down to 3%, we would say that was a period of disinflation. So prices were still going up, but they weren't going up as much or as fast as they were. All right? So please be able to use these terms correctly or to define them correctly as needed. All right, so how do we measure this crap? What do we use? We don't even use a model. We'll use an equation, which is even better, right? But what do we use? I mean, what's the Consumer Price Index, CPI, all right? No, you love math, Jeremy. right, so again, please keep in mind that this is the consumer price index, so it's based off of consumer goods, whereas the GDP chain index, it's the same sort of, except that that includes everything that you might buy, not just what consumers buy, right? You and I, we're going to buy, staplers and pens and paper and energy drinks and Cokes and water, but we're not going to buy classrooms. We're not going to buy roads, right? Those are not a part of the consumer price index, okay? And more recently, there have been divide outs or carve outs for the consumer price index to take into account things like gasoline and food prices, because those are more along the lines of what people consider staples, necessities, and that they really shouldn't drive consumer price index, and that we should really base it off of things that you don't necessarily have to buy, but that you do buy per se. All right, so there's two types of numbers you will hear out there. There's the consumer price index, and then the consumer price index with travel and food marked out of it. All right. Again, it's just one of those things that, honestly, I believe it's economists trying to keep job security. But again, it's another slightly different factor, because what we're trying to do is to get a real, true feeling for what inflation is. And if it's driven off of just a change in gas prices, that's not general average prices, right? Then it's gas prices, and that really, if that's such a big deal in our economy, we shouldn't just focus on just that, right? So, is it pertinent to carve out food and gas? I don't know. Thank God I don't have to know. But realize that you may hear that, okay? For this class, consumer price index, we include gas and food and everything that a consumer may purchase, period, okay? So I'm not going to try and float tricks at you like that, okay? That's just what major news networks will do nowadays, all right? So how do we determine what the CPI is? The cool thing about it is that the way they do it, you use a market basket of goods. Okay. What the hell is a market basket of goods? All right, the idea here is that a market basket of goods is the average number of each good / service in the economy that consumers buy. That's what the definition of a market basket of goods is, all right? So it's just a basket of however much everybody buys, right? So if you take everybody in the country and say, okay, how many apples do all of you buy? Well, they'll ask me, and I'll say, well, every month I buy, 10 apples, right? We ask Amanda, she says, well, I only buy 2. We ask Carissa, she says, well, I buy 5. And Jeremy says, I hate apples, I don't buy any, right? We'll take all of those numbers, we'll average them up, and we'll say that the average American buys 2.2 apples. So in the market basket of goods will be 2.2 apples. And what we'll do is, based on each economy, we'll walk around and figure out, what does 2.2 apples cost? Add it to the basket. And then do that with every good out there, right? So do it for oranges, do it for bananas, do it for pants, do it for underwear, do it for haircuts, do it for tax advice, do it for everything, right? Everything that we might buy, throw it in there, all right? And then CPI will just be defined as, so CPI in a given year, say 2013. So we'll take the market basket value of goods in the year 2013 and divide it by the market basket value in what we call the base year. It might be 2012, it might be 2010, it might be 2005. It doesn't matter. You just pick your favorite base year. So what does base year mean? The idea here is that it doesn't matter what you set to be your base year. You just have to be consistent all the time. So if you set your base year to be 2010, to figure out what 2013 CPI is, you take 2013's basket, divide it by 2010's. To figure out 2012's, do the same thing except use 2012 on the top. Again, still divide by 2010. So it's just being consistent and averaging it compared to one base year. That's the idea behind a base. And the base can be any year, it doesn't matter. Right now, a lot of the inflation is still being based off of 1980. Just because it takes so much work to change the base year on all of the software that the government works with. Yeah. I mean, given the current state of affairs of the Affordable Care Act website, it's not such a bad idea. If they got something that works, to just leave it alone and not break it. This is a percentage, folks, so what do I have to do? Yeah. So, again, let me just reiterate. A base year is any year you want, but all CPI years must be divided by that year. It's what mathematicians will say normalizing. You're normalizing to a specific year, and whatever year you normalize to is perfectly fine. It doesn't matter because the normalization factor will just be changed based on where you base it, but the overall comparisons will be exactly the same. So just to be safe, let's do a calculation, because if I'm not going to draw a graph, I have to at least write some numbers up here. Make me feel better about myself. You got to do some math to know economics, period. Let's assume that our base year is 2010. All right? And I want you to find CPI in 2010, 2011, and 2012. And here I will tell you that a market basket in 2010 was $6,255. And again, the numbers are completely, right out of there, okay? I have no idea if these numbers are accurate, okay? I'm just making them up. All right? And a market basket in 2011 was $6,300. And a market basket in 2012 was $6,295. All right, so basically, plug them in the formula. Round to the nearest percent. And yes, you will need a calculator for some of the calculations here. Not a bad idea for the next, at least for this chapter's homework, to have a calculator handy, because I think I asked you to do this on the homework too. All right, so What's CPI for 2010? Careful. The CPI in the base year is always 100, period, okay? That's just the way it works, right? Because you're always going to take, if you're using the base year, you're going to take its value and divide by its value, which is always 1, right? So really deep math. If you divide a number by itself, you're going to get 1. Okay, what's our market basket of goods in 2010? Okay, we're going to divide by whatever the base year is. What's the base year? Uh-huh. Yeah, so what's the market basket in 2010? Well, 62. Well, you're going to divide those two. You're going to get 1, and then you multiply by 100. So what's CPI in 2011? What was that? 99. Take your market value in 2011, divide by 2010, multiply by 100. Yeah, you got it flipped. 100.72, so round it to the nearest 101. So what was my CPI in 2012 then? Was it still 101? I didn't use big enough changes in my numbers, huh? Sorry. Okay. So what is CPI in 2013 if 2013 is $8,100? There we go. Let's get one big number. Round it to the nearest digit. 130, right? So if it's 129.5 or more, 130. So again, though, the way you do it, take whatever the market basket is in the year you're working with, divide by the base, and then multiply that number by 100. Uh-huh. No, okay, that definitely use the number, not the year itself. So divide by the number, 6,255. The market basket is in that year, is what the number you always divide by. That's why all of these were roughly the same, and not, like 300% or something like that. Yes, you can. Yes, this is good for you. Physically abusing your calculator is okay, but getting the right answer is still necessary. All right, now, that's all well and good calculating this CPI crap, but what do we really care about? I mean, what is everybody screaming about? They're really caring about the inflation rate, right? Well, the inflation rate is just the percentage change in CPI from year to year. So if you want to figure out what the inflation rate in 2013 is, you take CPI in 2013, subtract CPI in 2012, divide that by CPI in 2012, and again, this is a percent, so multiply by 100. Percentage change. You've done this if you've done math with business applications. Psych. Chelsea. Amanda. Jeremy. This is a percentage increase in CPI from one year to the next. So if we wanted to figure it out for this example I came up with here, CPI in 2013 is 130. CPI in 2012 is 101. Divide by whatever CPI is in 2012, 101.
29%.
Yeah, nasty. And then don't forget to multiply that number by 100. Again, whenever you're doing inflation rate, it's always 1 year minus the year before. It's always the rate of change from year to year. So if our inflation rate was in 2012, what would I do? All right. So we would do CPI of 2012 minus CPI of 2011, all divided by the CPI of 2011 times 100. So in my example, what was CPI? What was inflation in 2000? Yes, 0. There's nothing wrong with this 0% inflation rate, right? That's actually what it was on average in 2012. 0. Right? We didn't have a growth in prices over the last year, on average, right? So here we would say this is 101 minus 101 divided by 101 times 100, which is 0. So there's no, right, this was, what'd you guys say, that was 29%? That was ugly, right? 2013 sucks. So again, this is just a matter of doing the calculation and, punching the numbers in a little bit. But it's important to remember that inflation is really always driven from year to year, okay? All right. So what are some of the problems with worrying about inflation? I mean, some of the things that people are buying inside of these market basket of goods is like, a tenth of a yacht, right? Right? I mean, the average person out there buys a yacht. How many of you have bought a yacht before? Yeah, I have 5, of course, right? See, you know someone who has bought a yacht before. There's someone. That's why it's in the market basket, right? Because someone's bought it. Of course, it's not any of us, maybe, but we know someone who has.
Dad used to have a yacht until 2000 prices pushed him off, so he had to sell it and pay a mortgage.
There you go. Right. That tends to be how most people talk about their yachts. So anyways, do realize that part of this worrying about inflation stuff is that it's general, right? And our needs are specific, right? We need to be able to eat every day, right? So we care about what happens to the prices of food because we have to go out and buy it. Now again, though, remember that some of the things that are in this market basket of good are foods that you will never eat, right? I mean, how many of you eat quinoa every week? That's quinoa, if you've ever seen the commercial. It's quinoa. That's the proper pronunciation. Me too. But that's the idea, though. Again, that's a food. It's a staple. Some people eat it every day because it's the thing to eat, right? It's actually a gluten-free rice, right? So if you have, it's really, you got to cook it for like an hour for it to get soft. It's a real pain in the ass. But once you get it, it's one, it's pretty good for you. 2, it's gluten-free, and 3, it's the same as rice for the most part, right? But again, it's the general stuff, and ours tend to be specific. So while inflation is something that we worry about, if it's necessarily going to affect us directly, yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things about averages, right? Some part of the average will affect us, some part of it won't. And the question is, are the things that we care about the things that are actually going up in price, or are they actually things that are going down, right? I mean, maybe the only thing that you guys and I ever buy are like flat screen TVs, right? We would be like singing in the rain, right? Because the price has just been dropping nonstop. Woohoo! Yay! Well, I mean, that's the idea anyways. Okay, so bear with that in mind when you deal with... Now, the other thing about it is we could also compare this to, say, 2001, right? We could figure out, well, what was the market basket of goods in 2001 and play the same game, right? The problem here is that we're trying to compare two market baskets of goods. What were the market basket of goods like in 2001 compared to 2013? Were they the same? I mean, did you buy the same thing back in 2001 that you're buying now? Probably not, right? And in fact, there's probably a whole bunch of new things in the basket in 2013 that weren't there in 2001. Right? Back in 2001, you guys were still buying VCR tapes. How many of you bought a video cassette recording tape? 2013. I mean, you did back in 2000. Yeah, see, some of us are still buying it. Of course, did you buy it new? No, because they're not making them new anymore. You can go to a garage sale and buy, 5 for $1. But I mean, again, so the other problem with inflation is that we're comparing these market baskets, and sometimes the market baskets maybe really aren't comparable because the goods are different. But we have to use something, right? And so the something we do is the average thing that people buy. And if they're slightly different, well, it'll come out in the wash, right? And that's kind of how we argue that the inflation rate, the way we're calculating it, is okay. All right, so given all of this stuff, what does inflation mean? All right, how does it affect us? Well, the kicker is that inflation shrinks your earning power, right? So just like we can convert real nominal GDP into real GDP, you can do the same thing with your income, right? Same type of thing. Except here, the normalizing factor is always just whatever CPI was in any given year. So let's assume that in 2013, I make, let's suppose that, let's live in la-la land, right? Let's suppose that I make $100,000 in 2013. Some of it came from questionable deeds, but whatever. What was my real income? Based on the calculation we just made a little bit ago, right? So your real income is going to be whatever you actually made, right? So that's the nominal, $100,000. What was CPI in this year? So if this was in 2013, we would use... Actually, you don't use the inflation rate, you use the CPI. Yeah, use directly CPI. It's similar to using the inflation rate, but it's not quite the same. And then after you're done with that, make sure you multiply by 100 because it's still an evening out factor. Well, let's round it to the nearest dollar. That's good enough. I probably threw the 7 pennies away anyways. But the idea is that the inflation during this year zapped my $100,000 down to a more realistic $77,000 that I could actually use to spend on stuff, right? Because of course, as I'm buying food, the price of food is going up 29%, on a yearly basis, right? So every month it's going up like 2 or 3%. This is in 2013. So you take the CPI of the year that you were working in, that you're trying to convert it into real, and divide by it and multiply by the 100. So if I said that this was in 2012, if I wanted to know what my real income was, I would use this CPI instead, and it wouldn't look as bad. So the key is just making sure you use year to year. And the nice part about it then is that you can actually use these to compare whether or not you're actually making more or less money on a year-over-year basis, okay? So let's set the table slightly differently because my numbers were kind of crappy. Sorry about that. All right, so let's see. So back in 2005, I was still programming for Epic Systems Corporation, and I was making pretty good money. All right, CPI was 120 that year. In 2006, I got a $5,000 raise, which may sound like a big deal. It wasn't at the time. Once you have a bunch of money, a little bit more doesn't seem like as much. If they gave me $5,000 now, I'd be like, wow, awesome. That's the way rich people work, man. When you have money, you're like a little bit more, yeah, whatever. But when you don't have so much, it's like teacher, not teacher. Okay, so, and CPI, let's say it was 126. My question to you was, what was my real raise from 2005 to 2006? And in order to calculate that, basically you have to take my nominal income in both of these years and convert them into real income, and then you can compare them. Well, figure them both out, and then we can see the difference once we write them out. Round it to the nearest dollar. Don't worry about the pennies. Once you're making $120,000, you don't worry about pennies, folks. You throw them at people as you walk around. I mean, that's why Bill Gates walks around and throws $100 bills at people, right? Because a penny to me is the same as a $100 bill to him. When you've got billions of dollars worth of income. That's very true. That's not how they stay rich. They do donate billions of dollars, though. And that's. Oh yeah, of course. Okay. And don't forget the 2006 real. I wanted to know what my real raise was given this situation. All right, so what was my real income back in 2005? So 91,667 was my real income. Well, let's round it to the nearest dollar. Let's not worry about pennies. That's too much detail. How much was my real income in 2006? Is that what everybody else got? What was my pay raise? Yeah, I lost. I lost money. Even though I got a $5,000 pay raise, that $5,000 pay raise didn't cover inflation. Guess what amount of a pay raise I got this year here from the state of Wisconsin? 0. Was there any inflation? Well, real money, yes. And on top of it, the year before I had to take a 6% pay cut to fund my retirement, so yeah, it's been... Ask me again why I do this job. Please don't. Yeah, best not to think about it, right? They always are hiring at Epic. I keep resisting the temptation. There's no way I'd go back to that. She probably would. That's the sad part. You guys are way more fun than the people at Epic. All right, so just realize that you need to be able to convert your money to real money as well, just as you have to do everything else, and that inflation is a factor, right? All right, now, what else does inflation hit? Inflation also hits interest rates. So banks take a hit from inflation, right? Of course, banks are much better at buffering themselves to it, but they still take a hit. The cool thing about it is that this calculation, you guys are going to like this one. The real interest rate, you got to start with the nominal interest rate. And the cool thing about it is all you have to do is subtract the inflation rate. That's it. So if your money is earning 5% interest and inflation is 2% interest, or 2% over that year, you earned 5% in interest, but you lost 2% of it in inflation, so you really only made 3% in interest. Please note, real interest rates can be negative. When the inflation rate gets higher than the interest rate, your real interest rate is truly negative. It actually hurts you to save money. It seems like it's insane, but the fact remains is that when there's inflation, the value of items is going up higher than the value of the amount of money you're making in your bank account. So you're better off going out and buying something solid like gold. Let it appreciate at whatever the inflation rate is, and you sell it at the end of that year, you will have made more money than you would have if you'd have left your money in the bank account. Yeah. So that's very, very serious things that are going on. That's exactly why right now certain people are investing a lot more money in gold, because the value of gold is going way faster than the value of interest rates. Well, it was back during the recession. It's sort of tanked in the last couple of years. But that's what, once the Great Recession got going and everybody and the stock market hit the tank, everybody took their money out of the stock market and started investing in gold. When everybody starts buying gold, when there's lots of demand for gold, what happens to the price of gold? Shoots way the hell up, right? I mean, the price of gold used to be almost $1,900 an ounce. It was
when you start seeing all the, we buy gold.
That's absolutely right. They're like, we'll give you $900 an ounce for your gold, and we'll sell it for $1,800 an ounce and double whatever you... And, oh yeah, it's one of those scary things that you have to worry about. Don't screw it away. All right, let's see. So these are all the calculations that you'll have to do. Folks, I am not going to ask you to calculate anything on a test. I'm not going to ask you to calculate CPI or calculate real interest rates or anything like that. You'll do it for homework, okay? So you'll have to do this once. But once you've done it, I won't ask you to do it again on a test, right? Like I said, I don't really want this class to be a do you understand what a percentage increase or decrease is. I would like to have it be that, but I've accepted that that's not really the right way of looking at it, okay? I want you to understand what inflation is, to see where it comes from and how it's calculated so that you have a better understanding of it, but memorizing formulas and being able to punch the stupid formulas into a calculator, you'll do that in your math class. Or you already have. Or you will soon. Right? Right? I'll see you all in my math and business applications class, right?
Hey, I actually have a question about that. How easy is it to take that online?
Oh.
It seems like math and business apps next semester is at the same time as all of 4 business classes.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
It's
It's, I have no idea. It's been taught online once before last year, and the fail rate was 60%.
It's like 2 or 3 sessions offered online next semester.
2 or 3?
Yeah.
For business
At
apps?
least 2.
What?
Yes.
I'm only teaching 1.
There's at least 2 other people, if not 3 other people, teaching math and business apps.
Oh, yeah. There's people teaching it, but they're teaching it in person.
There's at least one more online.
No, there's only one online, because I'm the only one teaching it online, and I'm only teaching 1 class of that online. There better be only one, or I'm going to be pissed. I am going to go have a chat with my dean.
Because this is like really, the time that math and business apps is offered is the same time as all core business classes. It's really frustrating.
I'll have to chat with the dean and see why we did that or how that happened. All right, so
But I don't want it to be a 60% fail rate for that either.
again, it's one of those where if you're taking a math class, folks, you know that you're going to have, if you haven't been doing math very, very much in your life, you know you're going to have to put a little bit more effort into it. If you're taking it online, you have to put that much more on top of it into it. And the problem with most students, they think, oh, it's online, it's easier. Yeah, that's exactly what they do, right? I mean, that's what they do in my Econ online class. They just Google the answer. And, well, I agree. And I ask questions that Google misses on purpose. So that if that's the way you take the class, you're going to fail anyway, so whatever. Okay. I like the concept of online. I like it, right? But I want the students to understand that it's going to require more effort. And I plan on doing things like this, right, where I video give so you can watch me teach it. You can't ask me questions, but you can at least see something, right? But we'll see how it goes. I haven't. It's going to be a variant on hybrid. I'm going to.
Oh yeah, I saw that it was a hybrid.
Yeah, I haven't decided how much of it's going to be hybrid. That's what I haven't determined yet.
None of it's really online.
That's.
Some of the stuff we have to turn in online, but most of the time people just cover it.
That wouldn't be a bad way of running it. We'll see though. I'm still designing. Sorry. Okay, so why do prices rise or fall? What makes prices change? Think back to the last half, the prior half. Supply and demand did it. Okay, so what has to happen to demand in order for prices to go up? The demand has to increase, right? Okay, so one of the ways that we get inflation is called demand pull inflation. Inflation, if I could spell the damn word. Get me talking about online classes, I get all riled up. Demand pull inflation, the idea here is that when we have lots of money and we are demanding products, right, whatever it is, doesn't matter what it is, as long as we're demanding lots of them, whether it's one specific one or in general overall, when you're buying stuff, there's shortages everywhere. Whenever there's shortages, prices go up, right? The sort of catchphrase for this is too much money chasing too few goods. So as we demand more products, the price of those products will go up. So when you see inflation out there in the economy, you kind of have to ask yourself, which type is it, right? One type is the demand pull. That's one. There's only two because there's, the other side of the coin is supply. What has to happen to supply in order for prices to go up? Supply has to decrease, right? They call it cost pull inflation, but realize that it's really supply driven, all right? And the reason that they call it cost push is that the price of resources rising will lead to a reduction in supply and a rise in prices. So normally they call it cost pull inflation because it's the resource costs rising, okay? So the catchphrase is resource costs on the rise.
Is it cost pull or cost push? Did you say cost push on the last?
Oh, cost push, yeah, sorry. It's not the same, it's cost push. One's pull, one's push. So that again, it's one of those, it's another thing to try and keep them separated. So what I may do to ask questions on this sort of thing is to paint a picture in society, like this current society is experiencing 10% inflation, and the economy is growing at 12%. What type of inflation are they having? Right, demand pull, because they're getting 12% growth in the economy, that means people are getting like a 12% raise every year. That's nice, right? Whew, they're demanding products. The other thing I may throw at you would be something along the lines of there is 10% inflation in this economy, and the price of gasoline has risen by 25%. Cost push, because pretty much everyone has to pay for gasoline if they're running a business, right? You either have to pay for it to heat the building you're in, you have to pay for it to ship your goods, et cetera, right? So normally this is the sort of thing that comes from some sort of a product that every business has to buy. Gas, electricity, taxes, that sort of a thing, all right? But these are the two types that you get. One last thing before we call it a day. This is just a quickie. Bear with me. When inflation is quote-unquote way high, the actual number for when we call it hyperinflation is sort of a little bit fuzzy, but it needs to be something around 50, 60, 70 or higher percent, right? It is 30%, but it's one of those things where if prices start shooting up really, really fast, what will people start doing? I mean, if you know that the price of food is going to be 30% higher next month, what do you do with your money as soon as you get it? You're going to go out and buy all the food you can right away, right? Right, because you know that tomorrow the prices are going to be higher. But if everybody takes every bit of money that they get and spends it on food right away, demands the food right away, what happens to prices the next day? It has to go way up, right? Because everybody just bought everything that you want. So what happens in hyperinflation is that you get this spiral where as soon as people get money, they spend it. But because everybody is spending everything that they get every second, prices have to keep spiraling with it because they keep buying everything as fast as they can. Scary shit. Okay? This doesn't happen very often. It's never happened in the United States. There's only a few places. If you look at Germany after World War II, or Argentina in the 2000s actually was experiencing hyperinflation, where literally prices doubled every year. They had 100% inflation. It was, I mean, if you lived in Argentina, I don't even understand how you lived, right? But the fact remains that nobody ever had any savings because as soon as they got money, they spent it, period. Or they, converted it to U.S. dollars. Because the U.S. dollar was relatively stable compared to the, whatever the Argentine, was it? Yeah, I have no idea what the Argentine dollar is. It's like a peso or something, or a lira, one of the two. Anyways, hyperinflation, very, very high inflation. That's chapter 13. Some homework. Let me see it really fast, make sure I give you some good stuff. 4 is good. 6 is good. Oh, 2 is good too. How about 2, 4, 6, and 8? Those are all good. Homework, chapter 13. 2, 4, 6, 285. And easy, so don't complain about them. That's like free 2 points if you screw it up. Like number 8. Just remember how we defined it. And yes, number 2 is the calculate inflation rates. Again, like I said, because you're doing it in homework, I won't ask you to do it on a quiz or a test. Did you turn me off, Joe?